Hi, I'm Tom Scioli, author of I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee. And you can find a pre-order link in the show notes below. I'm also the author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. And if you follow that same pre-order link, you can pre-order the new softcover edition of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. And here's another book that I'm the author of, Fantastic Four Grand Design, which is sort of the intersection point of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. So the three of them form a nice trilogy. And in the previous video, I talked about the first half of Fantastic Four Grand Design, and now I'm going to cover the second half. It initially came out as two 40-page issues of comics, and then was collected into one large 80-page story with a lot of really nice supplemental material to round out the book. In an oversized treasury edition, which was a lifelong dream of mine, to have one of my comics, published in the treasury edition format. It's my favorite comics format, and so I was very excited for this opportunity to have my comic published this way. And so this right here was the original cover for issue 2, and if we have some time, I'll talk about some of the covers that didn't make the cut, but one of my ideas for the covers was to sort of take a Kirby panel, redraw it and maybe make slight adjustments to it, but kind of like zoom in on a moment that, might seem innocuous in its original context, but could, possibly mean something else in the larger context. And then I have my corner box. I took, one of the corner boxes that Jack Kirby had done, and again made slight adjustments to it. The most notable adjustment being that I decided to show, whenever possible, I like to show the Fantastic Four employing their powers. So I had Mr. Fantastic, sort of stretch and squash himself. As far as the logo, I wanted to reinvent the Fantastic Four logo, which is, is kind of hard to do because it's a great logo just in and of itself. It's so, wonderful to begin with. And, where do you take it from there? Like, it's so bouncy and so fun and retro. It's really one of the great logos of all time. So in this case, since sort of, invisibility is one of the themes, I doubled it. I took, I drew it twice, overlaid them, and kind of made it into like a slightly out of focus, slightly transparent logo, just to kind of let you know you're in some other land. This is the Fantastic Four, but not quite like you've ever seen them. And then the grand design part, I took the 1970s Fantastic Four logo, which is a fine logo, but it's not the like all-time classic that the original Fantastic Four logo was. Everything's gone. The Watcher, Galactus, and all his equipment. It's as though it just never happened. I got news for you. It happened. It happened. So we start with my all-time favorite Fantastic Four story, The Coming of Galactus. This is a fairly straight retelling of it. Of course, the sort of condensing of the narrative, what you cut out and what you leave in, makes it into a very different reading experience. Part of this idea was that, the entire history of the Fantastic Four, all those comics were the first draft for Fantastic Four Grand Design. So there's some things that are just perfect in the first draft, or that you just, you have to make very, very slight adjustments to. And so I felt that there would be some moments in the story that I would have to do major revisions on. And then there were other ones where I could just sit back and let Jack Kirby and Stan Lee take the wheel. And so this is a segment where it's pretty much that. I love this encounter with this guy. Obviously, Ben, it's about damn time. Obviously, that Stan Lee didn't write that bit of dialogue. But how's about a belt in the Labanza? Ow, my knuckles. So that is, that's straight out of the book. I'm straight out of the Jack Kirby Stan Lee. I'm assuming those are Stan Lee. That's Stan Lee dialogue, and I love it. And I had to, in the editing process, it was, oh, you misspelled Labanza. And I'm like, yes, so did Stan Lee. and I want that double Z Labanza spelling. It's very, very important that we don't change a word of this. Is it my turn yet? Plink. Just one of the great uh, thing moments. I mean, this is the thing is. I mean, he's up there with Spider-Man as like the iconic Marvel character, and possibly the iconic Kirby character. I mean, he's just so great, and it's moments like these that just cement him in that firmament. Be sure to tell your friends in the ER what a phony I am. I think the original Stan Lee dialogue was emergency room. I shortened it to ER for space reasons. It wasn't enough to keep the Earth hidden. This is, the Watcher's big moment. This is where he really, he's been sort of behind the scenes, showing up here and there, but this is his big moment. And so again, like in the previous issue, I talked about the Silver Surfer that took up 1/3 of the page. That drawing, like when you've sort of conditioned the reading experience to where you're looking, rows of sort of panels stacked next to each other. When you get to, this is like a little more than half the page. It looks like, again, like the hugest thing you've ever seen. It kind of, what it's like if you're in a really dark room, and then when you come out into the sunlight and you're just like, whoa, what is that? And so, this is a great sort of payoff moment. And again, to me, the arrival of the Silver Surfer and the arrival of Galactus, those are my big takeaways from having read all the Fantastic Fours. It's like that's what it's all about. That's the stuff. This just sort of cosmic awe. This awe before the face of God. So here we have Galactus, and I had a lot of fun drawing him with all the Kirby crackle. Again, the Kirby crackle is another part of that's what's there when sort of when the cosmic, when God manifests itself. It's in the Kirby universe. It's surrounded by Kirby crackle, and had a lot of fun drawing him. Obviously, but based on a Kirby drawing, I made some adjustments. And the G, when Galactus first showed up, he had a G on his chest. He was also colored, brown, red, and green. That would have been a pretty bold choice if I kept that, but I don't know. I had to go with like the classic. I went with like a purple and magenta color scheme. But on his chest, he had the letter G. And in subsequent appearances, they removed that G. I felt like the character never looked quite balanced without that G. And so, Jack Kirby, sometimes he would take like photo stats of his comics and color them. And one of them was like from an issue of Thor where Galactus appears, and he, colored the page with Doc Martin dies. And he also drew a sort of like glyph on Galactus's chest. And it wasn't G-shaped, but it was a glyph because I think, Kirby felt like, design-wise, there's got to be something there. Like just an empty circle didn't feel right. I wanted to do the same. I wanted to put a glyph there, something sort of alien-looking, and this was my solution. Something that vaguely suggests a G, but is, not quite the letter G. And so I came up with that little design there. There's also in Marvel's, Alex Ross came up with, like, I thought, a really elegant solution to that same design problem. He sort of took like the letter G and sort of abstracted it to such a degree that it doesn't look like, oh, here's just some guy with the letter G on his chest, to remind him what his first initial is. It read as the letter G, but it also looked like, just sort of like a design element, much like, what the Superman logo eventually became. So I thought it was a very elegant solution. So Galactus arrives in spectacular fashion, and they have their face-off, Galactus and the Watcher, as sort of shown in the second page of part 1 of Fantastic Four Grand Design. And so again, this is unfolding, not too differently from the way it does in the comic. This is like a very, very, very faithful, retelling of that. Again, in those cases where I'm following, pretty closely to what Kirby and Stan did, it's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, just sort of studying those Kirby drawings and reiterating them. This I feel like is this panel is sort of like a 100% original Scioli panel where he picks up the thing. Hey, put me down. You have the same energy signal as your planet. You'll make a nice snack while I process your world. So that, I thought of the idea of like the thing, because he's sort of like an earth elemental, he's sort of, made out of cracked clay. Galactus would kind of view him as a mini planet, and he would be sort of like exactly the kind of thing that Galactus would eat, just in a smaller form, so he'd make a snack out of him. What's he making? It's a global super weapon. For what? Galactus eats like a connoisseur, the way you might take apart a lobster. Every piece, the hydro-energy of the oceans, the techno-energy of the cities, the human bioenergy. Then for dessert, the fiery molten core. The process begins. So that's all original Scioli dialogue there. You can't come into a person's home and start disintegrating things. I think I wrote that, but I'll have to double check and see. Maybe that was Stan Lee, but I feel like what I tried to do with, like, Stan Lee's dialogue tends to sort of like puff up, overinflate, obfuscate, and make things sort of grandiose, and sometimes the result is, you get some like really impressive stuff. Sometimes you get some really funny stuff, but sometimes it just, makes it just harder to understand, or just, it sort of like beats around the bush. And so I tried to make, sometimes I went with the Stan and kind of made sort of like purple prose. Other times I tried to just sort of cut to the chase. And this thing of you can't come into a person's home and start disintegrating things, that seems like, sort of cutting to the core. I've upset you. You're going to make me disappear. If Galactus commands, I will. And that's, there's a page of this sequence. You can see the pencils, Jack Kirby's pencils, and it has Jack Kirby's, liner notes where he explains what's going on in the scene to Stan, and then he also kind of makes dialogue suggestions sometimes. And Kirby's dialogue is very different from Stan's, and I went in a direction closer to Kirby's intention, where he's just disintegrated a bunch of things in Alicia's apartment, and then he's raising his hand to her, and there's a moment of tension where you're unsure and Alicia is unsure whether she's next, if she's going to get disintegrated next. In Stan's version, he just kind of tells this like, grandiose speech that has nothing to do with any of that, and kind of, you miss out on a very cool, very tense moment. And then the resolution, when he says, if Galactus commands it, I will, is not a very comforting, like I wanted some tension and stress the alien nature of the surfer. And so that, when he has his, sort of change of heart, it's that much more, hits you that much harder. And so again, like I get to do a retelling of, just like one of my favorite comics ever, this particular segment of Fantastic Four, that the Coming of Galactus 3-parter is just, it's one of the all-time greats. And I first encountered it in the Fantastic Four Treasury. So again, this is a homecoming. This is completing the circle for me. It was a story that blew my mind, and I read it early enough in my Kirby fandom that it made a huge impression, and just kind of, again, made me want to keep coming back for more. The Human Torch gets sent on his cosmic mission across, dimensional space to find Galactus's world ship, which he does find. Again, it's so much fun drawing that. And then it's pretty faithful to Kirby's original drawing. Had a blast doing it. But then this other stuff is pretty original. Like they don't really show you what happens to Johnny inside of Galactus's world ship. It kind of in the original story, it cuts away from there. You don't go inside. Now subsequent artists, like in the 70s and 80s and whatnot, have shown like, okay, what is going on inside of Galactus's world ship. But I kind of put that stuff aside and just sort of, did like what I imagine would go in there. And I thought it would be sort of like the last temptation of Christ or something. Like he'd go in there and it's, there's like a part of the hero's journey, the temptation of the flesh, this kind of thing, an encounter with the goddess followed by a temptation of the flesh, and sort of being repulsed by the sort of animal nature of life. And so he goes in there and it's not just like, I've traveled across interdimensional subspace and now I'm in this giant spaceship that's larger than a galaxy, larger than planets, and yeah, it's just a normal spaceship inside. Like I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be like some kind of like reality warped area. And so he's seeing multiple versions of himself, and those multiple versions of himself are encountering multiple versions of Ben. Ben, what are you doing here, buddy? I've been here the whole time, Squirt. The whole gang's here. Crystal, you made it out of the negative zone. Which was sort of, his ongoing drama with Crystal is, how's he going to get her out of the negative zone? I now pronounce you man and wife, and there they are sharing a bed. And then, when God shows up and starts yelling at Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Johnny, have you forgotten your mission? Find the ultimate nullifier, study it, learn it, every part of it. Take it apart and put it back together blindfolded. Know it like a Marine knows his rifle. Earth is depending on you. Do not lose your way. So yeah, he sort of, it's reminding the hero of his mission. And these are the moments where I get to, sort of step for, like sort of, the Kirby and the Stan recedes into the background, and then the Scioli, comes into the foreground in moments like these. There it is. Why are you making such a big deal about it? Come back to bed. Yeah, Johnny, come back. Medusa? What? And I mean, originally, there was going to be a lot of flesh, like they were going to be sort of, naked, but that, it was for a scene with Johnny, in bed with a lot of women, they wanted them clothed. It was okay when, he and Crystal are in their marital bed, but it's a whole thing. It's another thing altogether, for multiple people. So I had to just sort of, alter the color so that, they're wearing sort of like a white slip. Hi, Johnny. Huh? Alicia? What about Ben? Ben who? Get your mitts off my gal. So that's another scene where that scene I'm sort of, there was a storyline in the 80s where Johnny began dating Alicia, the Thing's longtime love interest. And I mean, that storytelling stroke just felt too wrong. It felt very, very wrong, which I think was part of, John Byrne was trying to like sort of smash a lot of taboos and break a lot of ground in the Fantastic Four story and like turn a lot of things on their ear, which is, very effective. And he had a very successful run, but for like for a long time fan, it's kind of like, oh no, I didn't want that. So, so it was something that sort of stuck out to me. I have a friend who had been reading Fantastic Four, from very early on, maybe issue 1 or maybe like, issue 3, but it was somewhere in the single digits was when he started reading Fantastic Four, and it was his absolute favorite comic. Collected it all through the 60s, all through the 70s, and then, when we got to the 80s, and then, Alicia leaves Ben for Johnny Storm, he stopped collecting. He like, that was, that enough was enough. And so that ended his thing. And so I wanted to address that story point in a way, address it, but still have, Ben and Alicia's love story sort of close the loop on that. Give Ben and Alicia a happy ending in the way that they were denied in the comics. Now, when I was working on this comic, there was no Fantastic Four comic book coming out of Marvel. There hadn't been for a few years, and there wasn't one at the time when I was working on this. And that was one of the big inducements for me to work on the Fantastic Four. I thought I was going to be the only Fantastic Four comic. So, I mean, again, there were other factors that made me want to do the Fantastic Four, but that was definitely one of them. But in the making of this book, before it came out, there was Dan Slott's run on Fantastic Four did begin, and when I was making this comic, it was all, it was going to culminate in the wedding of Ben and Alicia and things like that. And Dan Slott's wedding of Ben and Alicia, made it to the stands before mine. And so it does sort of, nicely, sort of encapsulate things, makes mine part of that larger story. But that was pure coincidence. I didn't know he was going to do that. So we kind of came to the same conclusion independently of each other. There's certain things that the text just suggests, and Ben and Alicia getting sort of like a happy ending and getting to, the text just seems to be leading there. The same way that, for me, the text seems to be leading towards an unhappy outcome, or some unhappy moments for Reed and Sue's relationship. I feel like those, both of those things sort of, grow organically from the text itself. The ultimate nullifier, memorize it. Dang, I was never any good at school. Johnny, stay with me. I need you. I love you. Alicia, you're a Skrull. Now that was later artists who came in after John Byrne. It might have been, Steve Englehart or somebody came in after John Byrne and made it that the Alicia that Johnny had a relationship was not, in fact, the Alicia from the 60s. It was a Skrull disguised as Alicia. So it kind of, made it so that Johnny could have this romance with a Skrull, and Ben could have his romance with, with his Alicia. Now, and so I wanted to reference that as well. But the Skrull Alicia from the comics, especially when like somebody like Art Adams would draw her, she was a hot Skrull. Like she was, this very beautiful, very beautifully drawn Skrull, where I thought it would be more fun to just make it like, sort of have that moment of fear and repulsion of like, I just kissed a Skrull, and make her look like, the Skrulls we've seen up to this point, when she transforms into a Skrull. Now, again, this is part of Johnny's sort of, being sort of outside of time and space, being in this sort of other world, this where the rules of reality are different than the rules of our own. And so this is, this could be something that's happening in some other universe, or it could be a complete figment of his imagination, of his fears, of his lusts, sort of, made real. This is sort of like an area of mystery where what happens there, what happens on Galactus's world ship stays on Galactus's world ship. We have that moment. Time to go. How do I get out of this maze? And again, sort of, keeping like a mythological underpinning. And so I included some characters that, most of this story is within the scope of the Jack Kirby Stan Lee run. There are some other elements, elements that were important to me, that were important to the story that I folded in. And so one of them, I thought I'd sort of find a fun way to reference some of those heralds of Galactus that came later. And so they're in this sort of, strange world of Galactus's world ship. And so they help Johnny get out, and one by one, they're eliminated by this, Galactus's world ship's, white blood cells, which are sort of these empty, white Galactus costumes, and then an army of Punishers, and they get eliminated one by one. Frankie, you're on your own now, Torch. Thanks, Frankie. That was Frankie Ray, one of the heralds of Galactus. And so now Johnny's back. To the Fantastic Four, it looked like Johnny was there the whole time, just kind of knocked out. Reed's like, Johnny, can you hear me? He's snapping his fingers. Everybody clear. So big, which was, the quote from the, the original story. He came back saying, so big. But he's just been lying there. His journey through time and subspace and other dimensions, was instantaneous and invisible to the rest of the Fantastic Four. So it seems like he just passed out and had, like a hallucination, had sort of like a near-death experience or a fever dream. And so he's got in his hands, he's like, I got it. I brought it back. The ultimate nullifier. Johnny, what are you talking about? And he opens his hands and there's nothing there. It's gone. Slow down. What's gone? We're here for you, kid. Am I going crazy? Was it all in my mind? And so, in the original comic, he comes back with the ultimate nullifier. Now this, but I thought this would be a more interesting, way to go about it. And he, you'll have a dream and it's just like a really vivid dream and there's some object in it, maybe like a magical key, or maybe you found some like coin that you've never seen before, some kind of token in your dream, and you have it in your hand, and sometimes when you wake up, you sort of like almost expect to open up your hand and it's still there, and then it's not, and you realize, oh yeah, that was a dream. I never had that magical key or that special coin or whatever, and so I wanted to do sort of something like that, that he had it in his hand, but it's not there because what he had was something just from another reality, from another it was a dream. It was real, but it was a dream. The ultimate nullifier. It looked like this. Sue, get him inside. And so he's doing this sort of symbol of trying to, like, with his hand, do the shape of the ultimate nullifier, which it's kind of cool that the ultimate nullifier is sort of, you can kind of replicate that shape with your hand. Maybe that'll become a greeting for Fantastic Four fans, the ultimate nullifier greeting. And so Silver Surfer, after his time spent with Alicia, decides he's going to go up against, he's going to turn against Galactus and defend the Earth. Silver Surfer didn't understand what life really meant and what it was and what human beings are. Again, going back to Kirby's original ideas about the Silver Surfer, that he's learning about mankind and about humanity and what it is to be alive, to be truly alive and loved and part of a family. This is wrong. It is mass murder. The little pisher is trying to tell him to lay off. The Thing did not say that in the original version. He did not call Silver Surfer a little pisher. Let's hope he's stronger than he looks, Ben. Is it genocide to tread upon an anthill? I stand with these people. My own power directed at me. You betray your creator? And I set up Silver Surfer and Galactus as more of like a father-son relationship, which, if Galactus created him, then of course he is. If Galactus is his father and Silver Surfer is his son, but that's hewing to the original Kirby version. The name Norinrad is not said in the Scioli house, and so we have the big epic battle with Silver Surfer and Galactus, and then Sue says, "Reed, you need to see this." "I'm busy, darling." Huh? She creates an invisible cylinder to trap Reed and rolls him down inside the Baxter building. "Reed, look what our little Johnny did." And the ultimate nullifier. I did my best. And so Johnny, doing the best he can, scrawled, what he, recalls of the ultimate nullifier, the designs of the ultimate nullifier. "Do you think you can build it?" "No." "What do you mean, no?" "It doesn't make any sense. This whole thing is a child's drawing based on a madman's dream. It follows no geometry. It's nonsense. It's like asking me to make a square with 3 sides. But you can do anything, Reed. You're Mr. Fantastic. No matter what my fate, I face it without qualm. Your power is great, but if you persist, I'll be forced to destroy you. This is your doing, turning my son against me. It wouldn't be the first time a son betrayed a father. In a way, you are my child. I created you. Let me return the favor. If you are my creator, I shall be your destroyer." And Galactus kills the Watcher, and he sort of collapses. His robes collapse like Ben Kenobi in Star Wars, and the Watcher is dead, and you won't see him for the rest of the story. This is a self-contained graphic novel. I don't have to worry about, we want to save, we want to save the Watcher for another occasion. We want to do this, we want to make sure we can make Watcher toys or things like that. Like, I want to give the Fantastic Four an ending, and I can end, the stories of the individual characters, wherever I feel, would be sort of the most make the most sense and give the most drama. And so this is, sort of, like a surprise twist. I didn't want this book to be a throwaway. I didn't want it to be like, oh, I'm just retelling the story of the Fantastic Four, and you've all seen it before. If you've never read it before, here's your chance. If you have seen it before, here's a chance to have some fun with your old friends. I wanted, to make a book that was worth making, that was worth reading, and that could, sort of surprise you and jar you and take you on a very real journey, and a journey with like real danger and real stakes. And so this is one of those moments. Initially, Fantastic Four Grand Design was going to be 4 books. It was going to be 2 issue miniseries. Ed's X-Men was 3 2-issue series. Mine was going to be 2 2-issue series, which would make 4. Which a nice number for the Fantastic Four. And so I sort of planned it accordingly. And the way I was going to structure it was that books 1 and 2 would be told fairly straight. It would be more or less, the Fantastic Four as you understand them to be. Sort of like one for you, one for me. That would be the one where it's like more or less a pretty, concise recap of the story. And then parts 3 and 4, that's where you'd be entering, my world. That's where I would take over and things would start to get crazy. And so as the project evolved and, I was told, okay, it's going to be, just 2 issues instead of 4 issues, I had to adjust and course correct. And so I wasn't able to make a sort of clean break right down the middle of where the Kirby and Lee ends and the Scioli begins. So I kind of had to mix it in a little more, which I think in the end made a better product. I think it ended up, working out exactly the way it was supposed to work out. And, Scioli stuff is kind of, mixed in with the Kirby and Lee stuff. But as we get closer to the end, it becomes, you're more and more pulled into my world. You're more and more, pulled out of Kansas and into Oz by degrees as the story goes on. So this second volume, the weirdness quotient definitely goes up, and that's an example of it. And so Reed shows up with the ultimate nullifier, like he does in the original comic. Galactus, you say you're hungry? Why don't you eat this? The ultimate nullifier. Do you have any idea what that does? If you mean destroy the whole universe, then yes. And you'd use it. I'm just that stupid. So Reed Richards, the smartest man on Earth, the smartest man in the Marvel Universe, his big, his big hero moment when he like really saves Earth's bacon. That he says, I'm just that stupid. I'm pretty proud of this moment. And then Galactus's response is pretty awesome too. I believe you. You stood with them this day, and so you shall for all your days. He's gone. You sacrificed a lot, didn't you, Surfer? Just the universe. Silver Surfer, he lost the universe. He's no longer allowed to roam the universe, but he's more or less okay with that. And I sort of have him in a pose, sort of like the hands covering the genitals kind of pose, this sort of being denied paradise, sort of, like the first thing, Adam and Eve do when they're exiled from the Garden of Eden. They sort of, do that pose, sort of cover themselves because they know shame for the first time. So I thought, that's it, do the same thing with Silver Surfer. Of course, he's also holding a surfboard too. I'm glad Galactus didn't call your bluff, Stretcho. Me too. This thing doesn't work. It's just a prop. You mean you bet it all on a 2-bit squirt gun? Whatever works. So, this was important to me, that Reed's bluff with the ultimate nullifier, I wanted to make it a true bluff. That Johnny did his best to come back with the ultimate nullifier. He was unable to. His designs, they were just unworkable, and maybe it would be impossible to bring the ultimate nullifier into our world. But that Reed, based on what Johnny did bring back, was able to build a prop that was convincing enough for him to bluff Galactus. It works, like I'm really proud of that bit in particular. Alicia walks right by the thing. She don't even know I'm here. I knew you couldn't just stand by. You taught me the meaning of kindness. He talks like a poet, and she's eating it up. How can I even compete? If I was Alicia, I'd pick him too. Alicia, after sort of congratulating and thanking the Silver Surfer for standing up to Galactus, now she's looking for Ben, but the damage is already done. Ben's on his way out. And so we have the introduction of the guy from This Man, This Monster. And so in the original sort of in the original 4-issue version of Fantastic Four Grand Design, where it would have been broken into 2 Treasury editions, this would be the ending of the first Treasury edition. My name's Wyatt. I'm a little turned around here. Where are you headed? I don't know. The computer science building is that way. History is over there. Art department's up ahead. So I wanted it to end. So it would have ended, that sort of first big chapter would have ended with Johnny at a crossroads, at a literal crossroads, and then that's where he meets Wyatt Wingfoot. And that, I thought that would be like a nice ending. It's again, it's one of those hero's journey things where the hero ends someplace, master of 2 worlds they call it, where you can sort of go in any direction and do anything you want. Infinite possibility is open up to you. And I think of the scene at the end of Castaway, where where Tom Hanks is at this crossroads, and then like he meets the woman whose package her FedEx package he had that he was going to deliver. He meets her. He doesn't realize it's her, and she sort of passes by and goes, and you get the sense from their momentary encounter that they could be very happy together. But then she continues driving on, but before she does, she tells him, if you go that way, it'll take you to New York. If you go that way, it'll take you to Mexico. You go that way, it takes you to Canada. That way, it takes you to Hollywood. And so it was I was thinking of that sort of moment. And some people complained like, oh well, I wanted a real happy ending where Tom Hanks realizes that was her and goes back to her house and they live happily ever after. Like, why didn't they give us that? But it just it makes more sense to sort of end on that, at that point where he could literally master of 2 worlds and has ultimate possibility open to him at the end of the story. He can go anywhere, do whatever he wants. Then it's up to you to sort of create that little last bit of the story where he realizes that's her and he goes to her. But that the freedom is the important thing for the ending. That yes, maybe he'll end up happily ever after with her, but above all, the most important thing is this moment of freedom, of true freedom, and to sort of end your story there. So that's where it was going to end. Of course, when it went from 4 issues to 2 issues, from 2 treasuries to 1 treasury, things got shuffled and whatever. So I wasn't able to end this chapter exactly where I wanted to end it, but still, the moment still works. Some closure for Johnny, at least, in this stage of his life, starting college. Ben's AWOL, you're going to college. I guess this is the end of the Fantastic Four. I can still be a superhero on the weekends and Thanksgiving. Now we're getting into This Man, This Monster, another great story of the Fantastic Four, and the things getting rained on. This is another image I'm very proud of. I had this idea of in the rain, the water sort of collecting in the cracks between the things, rocky surface and sort of rolling down. So I'm, very proud of that little moment there. Every now and then you'll get some, super cool contribution that I've made to the iconography of the Marvel Universe, and that's one of them. So yeah, it's This Man, This Monster, which is reprinted in the back. Also, you get the Jack Kirby Stan Lee version of This Man, This Monster reprinted in the back. And yeah, I just sort of reinserted Kirby's collage there. Great moment. Again, you do a panel this size in a grand design book, and it looks like a splash page. I've done it. I'm at the crossroads of infinity, the junction to everywhere. Yeah, I mean, if you've read This Man, This Monster, it unfolds pretty much this way. Slight adjustments, and then again, you got the Inhumans, then you got the Silver Surfer, then you got Galactus, then you got this man, this monster going into subspace. Then you got the Black Panther. Like, it's just like one after the other. Boom, boom, boom. You know, this is the period of greatness for the Fantastic Four. This, you know, this span of time is when, you know, Fantastic Four was the greatest comic of all time. You know, it was during this moment, these, you know, this little run. And then the introduction of Black Panther, and they get an invitation to meet the Black Panther. And so I took the opening splash from that story, where it's the Black Panther in his electronic jungle. But the electronic jungle in those original comics, they were just sort of colored, you know, standard, you know, Kirby technology colors, just sort of like whites and blues and grays. But I thought, no, it's an electronic jungle. Kirby drew an electronic jungle. He drew electronic trees, electronic foliage. And so I thought they should be, you know, jungle colors. So I made, you know, to make it really read as like an electronic jungle. So like some of the technology is brown, some of it's green, you know, kind of those sort of jungle colors. But it turns out this electronic jungle is a trap for the Fantastic Four, and the Black Panther is catching them. I may not be able to see you, but I can smell you. You know, he makes short work of the Fantastic Four. In a lot of ways, Black Panther is the Batman of the Marvel Universe, and he can sort of, you know, even though he has no noticeable superpowers of his own, he's sort of, you know, a combination of immense wealth and immense preparation and immense, you know, scientific know-how, can make mincemeat of any, you know, superhero team, and he does that here. This was a part I was pretty proud of, that like he would have these, like, the Black Panther would have these like little white dots on his hand, and then he just kind of stick them on the thing, and there were these, you know, what is this junk? And then it's these little exploding pellets. Black Panther was ready for the Fantastic Four, but he wasn't ready for Wyatt Wingfoot. You know, just a normal, you know, college quarterback, and so Wyatt Wingfoot is kind of having his own adventure, sort of sneaking around, and we see just very casually that the Black Panther has Captain America and Iron Man in prison. And so I sort of had this thought, you know, of like he's trying to prove a point to America that this like sort of ramping up of these sort of superheroes is maybe viewed overseas as some kind of, you know, imperialist move, that they're sort of, you know, threatening other nations, that like we can send, you know, our sort of, at this point, our army of superheroes between the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, you know, Spider-Man and everybody else, that you know, America has sort of like an army of superheroes that we can send into your country and take the whole place over. And so Black Panther feels like it's important for him to, you know, through this whole exercise, to sort of assert that that Wakanda, you know, if there's any saber rattling going on, Wakanda is ready for it. Spare me your Yankee chest thumping. I don't understand. I calculated everything to the finest detail. How did you get out of my traps? You didn't count on me. Sometimes all it takes is one ordinary guy. I just want to know why you did this. Wakanda has never been colonized. In this new age of the superhero, I have a message for your masters. We are not afraid of America's army of superpowered colonizers. And now that he's communicated that message, it's like, okay, we can put down our dukes and have a delicious meal with some entertainment. I can't tell if they're honoring us or busting our chops. Stay and enjoy true Wakandan hospitality. In the original version, they're, you know, performing like an elaborate, you know, dance for the Fantastic Four, and then the Thing says, "A bunch of Fred Astaire's, they ain't." In this instance, I thought it would be more fun to have them, you know, honoring the Fantastic Four by, you know, putting on like a sort of Fantastic Four show. So, you know, this guy's dressed up as the Invisible Woman. He's got, you know, mirrors attached to him and a yellow wig. And then this guy's dressed up as the Human Torch. This guy's dressed up as the Thing. And then this guy's on stilts and, you know, dressed up as Mr. Fantastic. This era of Fantastic Four, it's just like one cool thing after another. And so now we're getting the introduction Claw, just one after the other, and the alarms going off. I think you will find it much more rewarding to be a friend than a foe.
Next time you want to make palsy wowsy, warn me first.
You have a way with words, Benjamin Grimm. When I was first reading all these comics, it was just so much fun, like one thing after another, and then these sort of, sound wave, these solid sound wave animal monsters start showing up on the outskirts of Wakanda, and it's, there's like a sonic sound wave elephant, there's a sonic sound wave gorilla, there's a sonic sound wave jungle cat, all made by Claw, and it's just one awesome thing after another. And then Claw's defeated, and then he goes into his machine, and then that's when he becomes sort of the Claw we know from the comics, the Claw from the Secret Wars and stuff. He, this sort of being of pure sound. And then we get the beginning of a Marvel tradition, the superhero softball game. They're all getting together to play. I mean, this, if you've read any X-Men, this is where it all started with Fantastic Four and the Black Panther and Wyatt Wingfoot, this baseball game. With a vibranium bat, anything is possible. Sorry to do this, but it's common knowledge that I hate to lose. The Black Panther's entertaining them. He's playing the piano for them, giving them expensive gifts, fashionable new clothes. When Mr. Fantastic puts on sunglasses, he becomes Plastic Man.
This high-power mini stress reliever weightlifting gimmick is the cat's pajamas.
All the treasures of Wakanda don't mean a thing without Crystal. I really like that ongoing story too, of like Johnny trying to get Crystal out of the dome around, which was lifted for the Simpsons movie. Now they meet Prester John. It's just these like greatest hits. There was a real sense of discovery when I was reading this era, because as a kid, just sort of, not being super versed in comic books, you definitely had a sense of the Fantastic Four and all these things. You kind of knew, a lot of these characters, but Prester John I had never heard of. So the fact that there's these sort of greatest hits moments of amazing comics where there's still a sense of discovery, where like I'm still discovering like, here's a cool, the Prester John segment, that, very cool moment, just for whatever, because they were cranking out the hits, that didn't become one of the sort of, lasting stars, but it meant it was sort of like a deep cut that I could have that sense of discovery with. Part of the larger narrative of trying to find Crystal. And then they do. I'm really proud of that first panel up there in the corner where Johnny is despondent because he's lost like another key to finding Crystal. But just when he's given up all hope, along comes Lockjaw. And then we cut back to the Inhumans story, and they're trying to bust out of that impenetrable barrier, and Black Bolt's doing his best. A nice sort of silent sequence with the silent character. The Thing shows up to apologize to Alicia about the whole misunderstanding with the Silver Surfer, and then when she opens the door, who's there with her?
Somebody better start saying something.
And I was having a lot of fun with this idea of showing things reflected in Silver Surfer's face. In this instance, the Thing's face reflected in the Silver Surfer's face. Take advantage of these reflective surfaces. And then again, another classic Fantastic Four issue where the Thing has a big brouhaha with the Silver Surfer. The Fantastic Four, Reed and Sue try to talk some sense into him. One day I hope to understand you humans and your strange emotions. Bye. Give these to Alicia. Perhaps it will make things better. So, Silver Surfer makes this sort of, crystal floral arrangement for, or maybe even a diamond floral arrangement for the Thing to give to Alicia. Nice little moment of closure there. And then Lockjaw, since Lockjaw is able to penetrate that barrier, then, maybe he can take us to the rest of the Inhumans. But unfortunately, he's an animal with an animal intelligence. He's a dog. He doesn't quite understand what they're telling him, and he's also kind of playful. So he's taking them on a tour through time and space, so they go to some other dimension with strange dinosaur-like creatures. Go out and read that whole segment from like issue like 40 something. I mean, just start with like the 40s or whatever, from like issue 40 to like maybe issue 70 or something. It's just an amazing run of comics. Like, do it. And then that was one of my favorite images I ever saw, was like Reed, staring into subspace, aka the negative zone, and seeing all these strange creatures, which again was in the Fantastic Four cartoon. I did not grow up with the Fantastic Four cartoon. I saw a couple episodes of like the Fantastic Four cartoon with Herbie in it when I was little, but I never saw the Alex Toth designed Fantastic Four cartoon from the 60s, but I've seen it in recent years, and it is incredible. And if I had grown up with that cartoon, I think I would have been a Fantastic Four superfan from day one. It's a really great cartoon. Really adapts a lot of the really great sort of like deep cut Fantastic Four stories that Jack and Stan worked on. It's just a great cartoon. Still not available streaming anywhere, and not available on DVD. Was never available on like DVD or VHS or anything. Not sure why, but it's an excellent cartoon for its time. And some aspects of it do hold up. And so I had this idea of a Herbie coffee maker, that like all the technology in the Baxter building, if it's got some kind of little computer personality, then it's Herbie. So yeah, like a Herbie Mr. Coffee, Mr. Herbie. And then Claw shows up doing his Sonic stuff. That the terrible twosome of Sandman and the Wingless Wizard, sort of like a reformed version of the Frightful Four, but missing a couple members. Next to the Coming of Galactus, my second favorite Fantastic Four storyline, just slightly below for me the Coming of Galactus, but might be sort of like the greatest sort of quintessential Marvel storyline, is when Silver Surfer meets Doctor Doom, and Doctor Doom steals his power, steals his surfboard. Just such a great story, and just that sort of Marvel magic of like, you have all these balls in the air, all these storytelling balls in the air, and then you find like a really nice way to have them all sort of coalesce and come to a crescendo at the same time. Really, possibly Jack Kirby and Stan Lee's last great moment together, when their collaboration was really firing on all cylinders and gelling, and Jack's storytelling and Jack's drawing were like as sharp as possible, just amazing. You had the great Joe Sinnott inks, and then Stan's writing is like top notch, and they're sort of like, they're not working against each other, they're reinforcing each other. It's just that magic gels, and it's just like their last great shining moment together, and then sort of, it's never as good. It's never as good after that. There are some good moments here and there after that, but it's never as good. This is like the peak, the crescendo of their collaboration on Fantastic Four, and maybe their collaboration period. Dr. Doom's got the powers of the Silver Surfer. He's gonna take over the world. He's awful. He turns Ben Grimm into charcoal. In the comic, he just sort of froze him, but I thought it'd be cool to make him into charcoal. He's fighting Reed, and he creates like a new weapon out of nothing, as he did was talking to the Silver Surfer, and he beats Mr. Fantastic's face out of recognition. It's not snapping back to normal. Like, I wanted a really like, oh, we are fucked moment. And Mr. Fantastic is sort of disfigured and can't put the pieces back together. Dr. Doom's kicking the Silver Surfer when he's down, lording his power over him, as Johnny finally gets his wish and comes back to the hidden land, the kingdom of the Inhumans. But his timing is just a little bit off. He comes there just as the Inhumans have sort of reached their breaking point and decided to do a desperate act. And Black Bolt decides to do the full scream. Not Black Bolt. No, Black Bolt, stop. You don't have to do this. And he lets out that giant scream that destroys the barrier, but also destroys their homeland, once and for all. I stood there and watched their whole world die. You've done it. All of your history and culture, it's trash. You didn't have to do this. Lockjaw could have. And then Black Bolt, does the shh, puts his finger over his lips and shows Johnny, there's Crystal. I'm sorry I was late. And then they hug. Doctor Doom is just destroying everything. And, as payback for the thing smashing his hands, he now smashes the thing's hands. Reed's device, this sort of, remote control electronic vampire, starts draining Doctor Doom's powers, and Doctor Doom chases it. And that was just... The real trap was to get Doctor Doom to chase it into space, where he collides with the barrier that Galactus has put around the Earth, the barrier that will only prevent the Silver Surfer from leaving the Earth. And now that Doctor Doom has Silver Surfer's powers, he also has his weaknesses. And now the powers return to the Surfer, and the Surfer destroys Doctor Doom's Latverian castle. And now we're sort of past the peak of, great, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Fantastic Four stories, but still a lot of cool stuff ahead. Just it's never quite as good. And so we get the Sandman showing up with his new cosmic makeover. Reed gets exiled to the negative zone. Again, great moment. Just not quite as great as what was happening an issue or two before. And he gets rescued by Triton, and then but they bring this sort of space mummy back with them. They do an alien autopsy on him, and it's a Planet of the Apes character, Blastar.
Keep them lawn cigar flinging fingers to yourself, Cornelius.
With his Blastar's blasty fingers, he detonates a nuclear level explosion on the thing's head.
You think that's the first time I've been nuked in the face?
I'm frozen. Which of you did this to Blastar? You're not the only ones with powers. I can talk to the elements. Tee-hee.
If you're looking for a job, we sure could use you.
So this is like roughly around the time Crystal joins the Fantastic Four. So I thought, maybe plant the seeds there. And then they go and meet the Sentry, which plugs into this, Kree stuff. And you got Ronan the Accuser with his hammer. The thing sort of blocks the hammer, and it backfires on Ronan. And then Alicia gets, led through a wall into this another strange kingdom, this strange laboratory where they're building Adam Warlock. I thought it'd be fun if, Adam Warlock, when he first shows up, he's still got a little bit of his cocoon on him. This was back, Kirby called him Cocoon Man. And then Stan dubbed him. And then later on, I don't know, I guess it was like Roy Thomas called him Adam Warlock. But I do like the Cocoon Man name, and definitely in this image, he definitely lives up to that Cocoon Man name. We still got some great stuff. Like, we're past the peak, but that doesn't mean there's not still some great stuff on the way down, and this was some great stuff. And I had him turn his creators into skeletons. We sought immortality, but found only abomination. So you are my makers. He's beautiful, too beautiful to behold. And then he turns them into skeletons. I am not impressed. Sue writes a Dear Reed letter. Our whole life is a lie. I never should have married you. I truly love you. You mean so much to me, but my heart belongs to some. Then she crumbles it up and then decides, no, she's not going to do it. And then she goes to Reed to sort of have a moment with him, but he sort of rebuffs her. I'm kind of in the middle of something, but then she gives him a kiss. Middle of another one of his sort of late night kind of things, up all night, working on some crazy new device. And so now we have the appearance of Psycho Man, which Kirby named Psychon in his initial version, and then the finished version, Stan changed it to Psycho Man. And I like Psychon better. So a master of manipulation calling himself Psychon came to Manhattan. He'd conquered the entire universe. Earth was next. We learned that his universe was actually the microverse of Subatomica. His body was just a vehicle, and he was its microscopic pilot. Marvel editorial was kind of like, oh, I don't know if we can use the word microverse because, whatever, like Micronauts and whatever, microverse. But I reminded them that in those 1960s issues, they, Stan and Jack referred to it as the microverse. They referred to it as a microverse. They referred to it as Subatomica, and eventually the name Subatomica stuck. But then when they started doing the Micronauts comic, they tied it back in with this Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Fantastic Four microverse, and called it the microverse. But the microverse was part of the nomenclature from the beginning. So I think it's okay to call the microverse in this particular instance. And so then when they travel to the microverse, I reference the exact issue where they start calling it the microverse in the 60s. Sue takes a pregnancy test. And she's like, oh God, I'm fucked. I let my guard down, and this is what happens. I wonder how long it takes Reed to notice. 9 months? Reed, I have something to tell you. I was waiting for a better moment. I'm pregnant, but there's something else you need to know. I don't know how to say this. A baby! Woohoo! So, he's coming.
I'm afraid to ask who.
Galactus. He calls me. I can't help him kill again. And so Reed tells Silver Surfer that you can stay here. The Baxter Building is a sanctuary for refugees from all over. The Negative Zone, the Skrull Galaxy, Planet X, Atlantis, Latveria, the Microverse. The Microverse, a universe in miniature. And so Silver Surfer hides in the Microverse, and Reed, decides to sort of, increase the size of his brain, which increases the scope of, why didn't I think of this sooner? And it increases the scope of his inventions and his ambitions, and does, he's trying to create sort of like a cosmic version of the Fantastic Four, and like the Baxter Building as this refuge for refugees from all over the multiverse. We've been preparing for the possibility of Galactus returning. We're going to have to step up those efforts. And he creates an army of robots, an army of Herbies, and finally does the thing he's been promising to do from day one. He finds a final cure for the Thing. But then there's a complication.
Reed gave me this pill just in case. Guess I'm the Thing forever all over again.
Oh, Ben, I love you just as you are. Haven't I said it enough? Mazel tov.
We got hitched.
More rings?
It's a wedding gift from Reed for the honeymoon. Thing ring, do your thing.
So this is my reference to the Thing cartoon, which was my first encounter with the Thing and with the Fantastic Four in general. Was, there was a cartoon, a Saturday morning cartoon where the Thing, where Ben Grimm, was like a teenager, and if he banged these two rings together on his fingers, all these rocks would come out of nowhere and cover him up, and he'd turn into the Thing. So that's the Thing as I was introduced to him. So that version will always, sort of have a place in my imagination. And so I made it canonical, and that this was Reed's wedding gift. He created a mechanism by which he can freely transform back and forth between the Thing and Ben Grimm, allowing him to have a somewhat normal life. Then we get Thor. As I mentioned in the previous video, I was considering the possibility of doing a Thor grand design, but ultimately opted to pitch a Fantastic Four grand design instead. I got to squeeze a little bit of Thor into here because, Thor and Sif are part of like the ongoing story of Cocoon Man, him, Adam Warlock. So I got a little bit there, and so yeah, he's getting his ass handed to him by Earth, and he's looking for other options. This is what your life will be, pointless conflict until the end. What else is there? There is a world beyond this one. Let me show you, Adam. And so then we get into, so then he goes to Counter Earth, where his adventures continue. And yeah, Galactus is making this sort of, final ultimatum on the Fantastic Four. He creates an evil reverse Fantastic Four and gives them a countdown. Then we have a flashback to another world that stood up to Galactus. An early like rebirth of Galactus. The story of Galactus's first victims. The first world that Galactus consumed, and they were these sort of bird people from Thor, who were part of like the Galactus versus Ego the Living Planet. And so now, Galactus is looking for other options other than eating Earth. But while he's looking, this sort of revenge story plays out. We were your first victims, forgotten by you, forgotten by history. We lured you here. We have not forgotten. Ego chomps on Galactus's head. And so then they go down into the microverse, and I reference the issue with the year so that it's all there. We can call it a microverse. And then, yeah, they go on some microverse adventures. And then now, there's complication with the pregnancy. So I sent them on a sort of, fantastic voyage, where they shrink themselves down and go in and deliver this sort of, this cosmic medicine. There's only one way to administer the cure, and they administer this cosmic medicine to the yet unborn Franklin Richards, and he opens his eyes, just having a lot of fun here. The baby's born. They're going to name him Franklin Benjamin Richards, after Sue and Johnny's dad, but also after Ben Grimm, and Ben is shocked and delighted. And of course, he's never going to call him Franklin. He's just going to call him Benji, call him by his middle name.
Wait a minute, is this normal? Benji's got gills.
Goo. I should have known. It's my worst fear. He's a mutant. And so now, Reed has to go off, and so ultimately to stop Galactus, he agrees to become Galactus's herald, and so Galactus, covers him in azure, in an azure metallic coat. So basically, this is Stan Lee and John Buscema's Silver Surfer origin. I just transposed it to Reed, that he was a scientist on an Earth-like planet, in this case Earth, who, to save his own world, volunteers to become the Herald of Galactus. And so he becomes, a metal-coated super being, who's going to travel from world to world on his cube, a square for a square. And he goes to, he finds different, he's trying to find another world for Galactus to eat. He finds Counter-Earth, but Counter-Earth has a protector, and it is Adam Warlock. And it's a carbon copy of Earth populated by beastmen. This is perfect. This world is under my protection. I finally found a place where I belong, where I am needed, and you would take it from me. And now they fight it out. And then Galactus dukes it out with, the High Evolutionary, the creator of life on Counter-Earth. Galactus breaks his back, like Bane broke Batman's back, and Reed decides to turn on Galactus. He can't just hand a world over to destruction, even to save his own, much like the Silver Surfer. You've made your decision, Reed. Your world dies. Unlike my previous herald, there is no love lost between us. Burn. And so this is the death of Reed Richards, never to be seen again. And now Galactus starts showing up on every view screen, in every coffee cup, telling Earth that you're fucked. And now it's time for initiate Baxter protocols. Where'd Reed keep it? In the nightstand. And so Johnny pulls out the ultimate nullifier that's been sitting there since the previous time they used it, and he holds it up to Galactus's head. Do it if you can. This time Galactus does call his bluff, and Johnny's fucked. Taller than the Statue of Liberty and twice as ugly. That was a line from, it was this, we're in territory after Stan and Jack. So I forget who it was, but it was, I loved that line and took it. Taller than the Statue of Liberty and twice as ugly. And so they're blasting. And now we got the whole crew showing up. Everybody's here. And then we got the Black Panther Power Rangers, forming a Black Panther Voltron, a Black Panther Megazord, a Black Panther Mecha, which is incorporating some stuff from the Black Panther movies and incorporating some stuff from Jack Kirby's 70s Black Panther miniseries, and it just feels so right. And when I was watching Black Panther 2, in the back of my mind, like it didn't occur to me until I was sitting there watching the movie and saw sort of things escalate. And in the back of my mind, I thought, what if Panthrax Pantherion, the giant Black Panther combining robot, what if that shows up here? And I was just like so delighted by that possibility. I got very excited, and of course it didn't end up happening, but just the possibility of it, if I ever see that end up in a movie, I'm going to be beaming. It's got a pretty good chance, I think. Tumazuma, I incorporated Tumazuma, Wyatt, Buddy, as sort of Wyatt's mecha, and we just have a battle royale with Galactus. Karnak shows up again. Like, I wanted to have a moment where all the various threads kind of come together, and it's like it wasn't pointless that we met the Inhumans, and like I didn't want the stories to peter out. I wanted them to crescendo, and so to have this big battle royale where everybody shows up, and then and the Inhumans have a role in it, and Karnak goes hi-ya and chops the Galactus's helmet in half. Galactus's head is exposed, and again they're avenging the death of Reed Richards, and Black Bolt just screams right in his face, knocks him backwards, and then the thing is like, this one's for Reed. Bam, 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 and just like repeatedly punches the fallen Galactus in the face until Johnny tells him, stop, Ben. But he's not telling Ben to stop because he's having mercy. He's told Ben to stop because now he's going to torch Galactus's head. And we did it.
Why don't it feel like we won?
And then the Silver Surfer is there bearing witness, and he throws a little, diamond rose that he created, a little cosmic rose he created down to the body of Galactus. Come on, Marvel. Adapt this. Put this in one of your movies. Put this in one of those animated things. Put it in one of those what if things. But I want to see Marvel, I handed you gold. This is brilliant stuff. I handed, just like Kirby, I handed you gold. So, do something with it. And then Galactus's brethren, the Celestials from the Eternals, carry him up carry his body up to their ship for their sort of the burial rites of the gods. And we get Hollow Reed. We had Azure Reed, and now we have holographic Reed. If you've activated this holographic simulation, I'm probably dead. Namor shows up. Come with me. If this has taught me anything, it's that we don't have forever. Wah. This is the boy. You're handsome, like your father. And then Ben's going out for a walk, and he goes into this little gate. And now we got Secret Wars. Secret Wars, which was very important to me. It was another sort of entry point for the Marvel Universe. It was kind of like, I loved all the superheroes, but finally they made some awesome superhero toys. And so I could, buy the ones I was familiar with, like Spider-Man, but then I could also buy the ones that I was less familiar with but wanted to learn more about, like Captain America and Iron Man. It's just so much fun. It was a great era to live through. And so I tried to make what I made sort of Secret Wars into sort of like a Valhalla for dead superheroes. You die and go to this world where it's like a never-ending battle. It's the Marvel superhero afterlife. And so that's where Ben finds Reed. And so we have this big all-out war. We get Kang not joining in the fun either. Why bother? I know how it all ends. Get to do a little mini version of the Spider-Man costume saga. A whole alien world to explore, huh? Get to draw the War Wheel toy. I get to show, it was implied in the original version of Secret Wars, but I get to show Dr. Doom hacking up Claw, and then Doom facing the Beyonder and becoming the new Beyonder and having ultimate power. And then this moment, like, again, I think that was the first issue of Secret Wars that I read. It was the one where Dr. Doom's all like trashed on the cover, and it's where he's like, hey, the wars are over. I'm just an ordinary, I win, you lose. I'm just an ordinary average guy. The wars are over. And he takes off his mask, and he's handsome, and he appears benevolent, but there's more to the story. And so Reed finds himself, he sort of wakes up from all of it as if it were all a dream, and he's in this sort of, the prisoner kind of village, referencing the one from, I think, like, issue 80 or something of the Fantastic Four, and it's, this prisoner-like world. He looks at a funhouse mirror, sees himself stretched. It's Doom o'clock already. So he's in a universe where Doom is God. Ben shows up, and holes are starting to show up in this fantasy world that he's in. There's Agatha Harkness. Wah, that's my baby. I don't know how, but that's my baby. Stop that man. And then he gets stopped by these these Doombots. He's awakened from the dream. And again, this is like referencing a Kirby cover that he drew for Fantastic Four during the 70s when he was no longer working on the Fantastic Four, but still drew covers for it. And it's, the final battle between Reed Richards and Dr. Doom, and he removes Doom's mask. No, my face. I wanted to give some final battles to everybody. And so now, the Reed hologram is, I'm a digital recording of the mind of your father. I am not a man as such, but I hope to teach you to be one. Just like you, I lost my father. Your grandfather was a member of a secret society dedicated to preserving the lost history of the planet Earth in an attempt to protect the human race from extinction. But then out of this hologram steps the real Reed. He's back. Daddy's home, my big boy. Daddy's missed you. Where's Sue? Reed, wait, please. His eyeballs pop out of their sockets. Maybe my favorite panel in this whole book. And he gets in a big fight with the Submariner. For God's sake, Reed, I thought you were dead. The whole world thought you were. This isn't new, is it? It's been going on a long time, hasn't it? How long? Since before or after our wedding? I'm leaving, Reed, and I'm taking Franklin with me. So he can grow up at the bottom of the ocean. And then, just as he's having this, this culmination point of his personal life's drama, he gets, pulled into another cosmic drama. The Trial of Reed Richards, sort of classic story, but like sort of a classic story where it sounds really awesome, and then you read it and it's not that, it doesn't live up to what you think it's going to be. So I tried to make a Trial of Reed Richards that pays off the way I wanted the Trial of Reed Richards to pay off. So he's being held on trial for the murder of Galactus. What kind of trial is this? Don't I get an advocate? And his advocate is the lawyer of the Marvel Universe, Daredevil. You have a strong alibi, Reed. You were on a different planet when Galactus died.
You got that right. He didn't do nothing. You want to point the finger at somebody? Point it at me.
He didn't physically carry out the act, but the murder was done according to Reed Fantastic's plan, his directions. The Fantastic Four did the deed. Is he not Mr. Fantastic? This tribunal does not waste its time prosecuting foot soldiers. They're saying Reed is Charles Manson.
And we're the Manson family, huh?
My only defense would be to implicate my family. How does the prisoner plead? I am Mr. Fantastic, and I killed Galactus.
I am Mr. Fantastic, and I killed Galactus.
I am Mr. Fantastic, and I killed Galactus. So we have an I am Spartacus moment. Thanks, Matt. I mean, Daredevil. The Inhumans are moving to the moon. Me and Chris are going with them. I'll miss you, John. So again, we're like referencing things that happen in the comics, but sort of making them play out in a way that I find to be dramatically satisfying, dramatically interesting, as opposed to the sort of arbitrary way that they play out in the established continuity. What? Who's there? I'm sorry, Mr. Richards. Reed, you got to help me kick. And so he helps Peter Parker get over his alien costume addiction. Maybe I should hold on to it. No, Pete, I think this is the safest place for it. We found a nanny. Meet Agatha. Sometimes I feel like she's turning my son against me. Call me Mommy. Hail Mephisto. This child will lead your armies. Go. Father, you knew it had to be this way. Ah, hail Mephisto. Your teenage years really had me and your mother worried. Hey, you guys chose the nanny, not me. So I got to have some fun with the Agatha Harkness having a witch as Franklin Richards' nanny. Got to play with it in a way that they never did in the comics, but I thought was very fun and very satisfying. And it was nice to see, sort of the dark side of Agatha show up in some of the Marvel shows. It feels like a sort of a pat on the back, that I was on the right, that I was onto something here. The story is accelerating towards its climax, towards its ending. And so now we have old Reed Richards, and Franklin is now a man, his father's son. Let's show them what the Richards boys can do. This is sort of the end game of Planet Earth, sort of, machine versus man.
Sorry I'm late. I had to swing by and pick up the kids. Kirby, Dan, Brooklyn, Jakey.
It was fun coming up with names and they, again, creating other Fantastic Fours within this. And so they could be a Fantastic Four, the Grimm family. Thing Ring, do your thing. It's about to get grim around here. Now, this version of the Fantastic Four, Ben's brood, riding around in Herbie the Love Bug. This version, they're like dressed in denim, and like when I came up with this, I was like, oh no, I really missed the boat, because the Fantastic Four are blue, and I never knew quite what to do with blue, if there was some way I could play with that. But it's like, yeah, give them denim. They're dressed in denim outfits. If I ever do like a Fantastic Four regular series, they're going to be wearing unstable denim. They're going to be wearing like a denim made from unstable molecules. It's about to get grim around here. That's their, it's clobbering time. It's this final war, when Machine takes over. That end of days scenario in the Marvel Universe that registered with me, that makes sense with me, that makes sense to me, that carries some weight for me, is Days of Future Past. It's just, it works, it registers. And that was sort of the apocalypse that Ed chose to build his X-Men Grand Design around. So I thought it makes so much sense to me, and like I completely agree with that call. So just as a way of sort of unifying the Grand Design project as a whole, I thought that would be interesting. There were a couple of creative choices I made in an attempt to sort of give some kind of, they don't necessarily fit together in sort of a, plot sense or whatever, but I wanted some things to sort of, thematically and aesthetically unify the Grand Design project, the larger project of X-Men Grand Design and Fantastic Four Grand Design. Jim hadn't started on his Hulk Grand Design yet, so I wasn't able to incorporate elements from his. Obviously, the Apocalypse be Days of Future Past just made sense to me. And again, it like that Days of Future Past, it just registers to me as the Marvel Apocalypse. It's, like I read it at a formative age. The imagery of it is just really seared into my brain, and it just makes sense. And the death of the Fantastic Four, all these characters. So I made that, the sort of thing. So there's this final battle being fought, and even though Sue lives with Namor at the bottom of the sea now, this is still her family. She's still part of this family, and so when they least expect it, she sort of shows up to fight this invasion. They're evacuating the planet Earth, and the Baxter Building is a giant spaceship, a sustaining habitat where this sort of life ship, this remainder of humanity, can sort of escape this robot apocalypse and perhaps find life on another planet. But Reed decides to stay behind, and you know what? So does his son. Franklin, why aren't you on the Baxter? The same reason you're still here.
Somebody's got to fight the good fight.
We're a team. Though they had many good years, the end of the FF was sad. The end of man was sadder still. The battle for Earth became a fight between the robots and the Sphinx's army of the undead. Humanity was a footnote. Johnny!
You bum! You killed my pal!
Reed, Sue. Epilogue. They turned what's left of my childhood home into their base. Franklin's final four. And so we get the Sphinx back from earlier in the series. Franklin's final four. So Franklin creates his own Fantastic Four, the final four. Humanity's last stand is going down at the Baxter, just like Dad always envisioned. It's Wolverine, Colossus, Storm, and the ultimate mutant, Franklin Richards. It's just at the end of this tunnel, but then he finds his death at the hands of a sentinel, of a giant robot. His family fought giant robots their whole lives, and he's undone by one. If you remove someone from the timeline in the moment just before their death, you've made a surgical cut to the time-space continuum. What grandfather can resist an opportunity to spoil their grandchild? So there's Nathaniel Richards, who might also be Rama Tut, who might also be Nathaniel Richards, who might also be Kang the Conqueror, the master of time and space. And he makes a surgical cut to the space-time continuum, removes Franklin Richards from it just before the moment of his death. The afterlife is cold and wet. Help!
Welcome aboard, me swabby.
I had a series of whimsical pirate adventures with my father and my uncles. I never told them who I was. So this is Franklin Richards' afterlife. He gets to live in the past in these halcyon days of pirate adventures with his father and his uncles, living the pirate's life, having so much fun. But nothing is forever. Take me with you. I want to see my mom.
Sorry, kid. Time travel don't work that way. See ya in the funny papers.
Dr. Doom, Mom, I love you. We're back to Fantastic Four number 5. And they're getting, pulled back to, their pirate adventure is over and they're getting pulled back to Dr. Doom and to Dr. Doom's castle, back to their adventures. So he got to have this moment, and he doesn't tell them that he's his son or that he's their nephew, because that would mess up the space-time continuum too much, But then he sees his mom, through Dr. Doom's time portal, his mother, that he lost, and he tells her he loves her. I love you. And it was important for me to have, the last panel be I love you. It just, fits the larger theme, the themes of what I was going for with this work. I'm so proud of this work. I'm so proud of this final page. And I wanted to give the Fantastic Four story is such a great story, and every great story deserves an ending. And so I'm so honored and humbled to be the one to give the story of the Fantastic Four an ending I always wanted for it, an ending it so richly deserves. But every ending is a beginning, especially in Marvel. And so continued in Fantastic Four number 5, Tom Scioli. So if you choose, this can be the end of the story of the Fantastic Four, or it can be just the beginning, and you can after you're done reading Fantastic Four Grand Design, you can pick up where you left off in Fantastic Four number 5 and see what happens to these guys after they go back through Dr. Doom's time portal. And maybe this is the way things will play out for the Fantastic Four, or maybe by going through this time loop, maybe some minuscule minor thing has changed, and maybe the Fantastic Four story will play out exactly the way it plays out in the regular Fantastic Four comics that we've all known and loved our whole lives. Or maybe it'll play out this way, maybe it'll play out that way. But it's just, that's all, folks. Thanks so much for joining me for this video. I'm Tom Scioli, author of I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee. And you can find a pre-order link in the show notes below for that book. And I'm also the author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. And that same pre-order link you can follow to pre-order the softcover edition of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.